In order to do that, we're going to transition into what we call the 8th lesson of the curriculum, and that is the New Testament true? Do we have an accurate copy of the original New Testament documents? And we have to actually answer 2 questions in question number 4. The 2 questions are this: do we have an accurate copy of the original New Testament documents? And secondly, do the original New Testament documents tell the truth? Those are the 2 main questions. When we come back here next time, we're going to spend a lot of time on question number 2. And that, for me, is the most interesting question. But tonight, we're going to spend time on question number 1. Do we have an accurate copy of the original New Testament documents? So let's take a look at that particular question. And it's an important question, but let me point out that generally this is a very settled question in scholarship. There are not many people who will answer no to question number 1, with one notable exception, and we're going to deal with them. One notable exception. In fact, I got an email from a United States Marine a couple years ago now, so I knew this man was no sissy. But he was not writing me as a tough guy. He was writing me as a distraught father. He said, Frank, I served in the United States Marine Corps. I know you served in the Navy. I went to the Naval Academy, went into the Marine Corps, served in the Iraq War, Desert Storm, the first one. He said, and my daughter was the top Christian student in her high school. She was one of the leaders in the youth group. She won several scholarships to go off to college from Christian organizations. And so we sent her off to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And she wanted to win the campus for Christ. And trust me, it needs to be won for Christ. She went there ready to join all the Christian groups and get involved. He said, I got a phone call about 6 weeks into the semester from her. He said, her words devastated me. She said, Dad, I don't believe in God anymore. You don't believe in God anymore? What? He said, I got in my car. I drove 4 hours from Hickory, North Carolina, all the way to Chapel Hill. I sat down with her and got nowhere with her. I said, what do you mean you don't believe in God anymore? Why not? She said, well, you know, I've got this New Testament professor who says we can't trust the New Testament documents. In fact, we don't even know who wrote them. We don't know much about them. And, you know, there's errors in there. There's contradictions. So the Bible can't be true. So I'm an atheist now, Dad. He said, Frank, is there anything I can do about this? I said, Tom, did you ever get her any apologetics training, evidence that it's true? He said, you know, we wanted to before I sent her off to college, but we just never got around to it. Is there anything I can do now? I said, no, Tom, but you can ask her the 2 questions. You know the 2 questions already. The second one, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? I said, Tom, if she hesitates at all, it's not just here, it's also here. She might not want it to be true. But I can almost guarantee you that if she knew what we're about to go through right now and what we will go through next time we come back here, she would easily have been able to refute what her New Testament professor said. In fact, she said to her dad, she said, oh, well, this New Testament professor, he's from an Ivy League school, implying, of course, he must know the truth. Yeah, sure. What we're about to go through, if she knew, I submit to you, she probably would not have walked away. We don't know that for sure because you always have free will, right? You can always do what you want. In fact, we all suppress the truth sometimes to do what we want, don't we? But all I'm saying is if you get young people this information, you can at least inoculate them against some of the nonsense that they're going to be taught once they leave your home. So let's take a look at how we know we have an accurate copy of the original New Testament documents. And there are 4 major reasons we know. We have earlier manuscripts, more accurately copied manuscripts, and more abundantly supported manuscripts than anything else from the ancient world. In fact, we have, you'll see here in a minute, a wealth of evidence that the New Testament documents were copied down correctly. This chart will show you how great our evidence is. And this chart is in the book. You can see the New Testament documents have, right now this number is almost 5,700. There's 5,700 handwritten Greek manuscripts around the world now. Many of them are in museums like the British Museum. I saw one of them in the British Library last year. And the earliest one we know about is about 25 years from the original to the first copy. And that is the John Rylands fragment, a small part of the book of John, chapter 18. However, there's a new discovery that has just been made that Daniel Wallace, who heads the Center for the Study of New Testament Manuscripts, he is a professor at Dallas Theological Seminary. Dan Wallace says, we have just discovered a manuscript from the 1st century. In other words, the John Rylands fragment was dated to about 114 to 125 AD. The fragment they have just discovered, they think, is in the 1st century. And it's a fragment of the Gospel of Mark. I'm actually going to see this next week. I'm going down to Dallas with a bunch of other apologists and scholars to look at this fragment, and Daniel Wallace will be there. This is all going to be published early in 2013, but Wallace has already pointed out in a debate he had with Bart Ehrman, who's a professor we'll talk about here in a few minutes from UNC Chapel Hill, that this discovery has just been made in Egypt. This is actually a groundbreaking discovery for New Testament scholarship, particularly when it comes to manuscript evidence. So this is going to be backed up even more. But you look at everything else from the ancient world. All these ancient writers have many fewer copies in terms of their original manuscripts. These are copies. They're not real originals. Nothing from the ancient world exists or has survived in original form. These are all copies of the original. And they have 500-year gaps, 1,400-year gaps, 1,200-year gaps, 1,000-year gaps, 750-year gaps. Yet the New Testament has 5,700 and a very short time frame between the original and the first copy. You say, well, how do we know what the original said if we don't have it? Let me give you an illustration. Let's suppose we don't have the original, but we do have copies. And we want to reconstruct the original. Let's take a verse in Romans chapter 3, verse 26. This is what the verse says. Say copy 1 says, God is, oh, you got an error there in the first word or the first letter of the third word. You don't know really what that word might be. God is blank and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. Then you compare that to the second copy and you see, you got an error in the third word, second letter. And then you get a third copy, and you got an error in the third letter of the third word. And then you get the fourth copy, and you've got an error in the fourth letter of the third word. Everything else is the same. Do you know what the original said? Yeah, it's quite easy to reconstruct the original. God is the just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. This is what New Testament scholars do when they're trying to reconstruct the original. They take all the manuscripts, they compare them, and they can reconstruct the original. Now note, there are far fewer variations in the New Testament documents than this example gives. Far fewer. This is just an example to show you how they compare things. It would be like me if I right now told you my name and address, and I said it, and you wrote it down, and then everybody compared what everyone wrote down. You would be able to reconstruct my address from all the copies. Even if somebody made an error somewhere, you'd go, oh, that's an outlier, that's an error. That's how they do this. Now, actually, somebody may ask, well, why don't we have the original? Why wouldn't God have preserved the original? I'm speculating now, but here's two possible reasons why the original has not been preserved. Reason number one, if the original had been preserved, we might have all sorts of wars and squabbles over it, right? And we'd worship it, it'd be a relic and all this. But reason number two might be more compelling. If there was an original that we had discovered, and let's suppose I had it, what could I do to it? I could change it, couldn't I? But if you have a copy, 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 and I have a copy, and I change my copy, and then we get together and we compare all the copies, are you all going to know that I'm a heretic? Yeah, because mine's different from everybody else's. You go, Turek, you changed your copy. So ironically, by not preserving the original, God can preserve the original better by spreading copies all over the ancient world, because then you can reconstruct them. Nobody has control. You can reconstruct the original with great accuracy. Now, it's not just that we have manuscript evidence. You see this guy here, this is Diocletian, Roman emperor, 284 to 305 AD. If it wasn't for Diocletian, we'd probably have many more manuscripts than we do, because he had a great persecution of Christians during his reign. He tried to burn manuscripts and even burn Christians. But even if Diocletian has succeeded in destroying all the manuscripts, or most of the manuscripts at the time, we could still reconstruct a lot of the New Testament. Why? Well, check this out. 43% of the 8,000 New Testament verses in the manuscript, or in the New Testament, are in manuscripts from the 2nd century or earlier. Or right now they're all 2nd century, except for this one we've just discovered. What I'm trying to say here is that of the New Testament, 43% of them is found in manuscripts that are 200 AD or prior. So we've got very early manuscript evidence. Also, there's over 36,000 quotations from the early church fathers. And when you take all these quotations together, you can reconstruct almost half of the New Testament. Now, you may have heard that someone, and in fact, it's in our book. This comes from an earlier book that says you can reconstruct the entire New Testament except for 11 verses with just the 36,000 quotations from the early church fathers. Turns out that's not true. We've done some further research. You can construct about half of the New Testament, 46%, from these 36,000 quotations. But that's still pretty good, right? In other words, if you had no manuscripts, you could reconstruct the New Testament from just those church quotations, when the church fathers quoted the documents or preached on them and wrote them down. In addition to the 5,700 Greek manuscripts, there are 19,000 manuscripts in other languages, like Coptic and Syriac and Latin. And here's the amazing thing, is that the total manuscripts stack over a mile high. Now, nobody's actually done this, by the way. But if you were to stack them all up, they would go over a mile high. You take an author from a classical Greek author like Josephus, his manuscripts that we have would stack to about 4 feet high. Yet the New Testament manuscripts would stack to over a mile high. It's not that we don't have enough information. We have too much information. There are some areas we go, we've got too much here. We don't know what the original reading was. We got too much data. Although in areas, as you'll see here in a minute, where we're unsure, they're not critical areas. And for that, we need to go to this man, Bart Ehrman. How many have ever heard of this man? Can I see your hands, please? 20% of us. Bart Ehrman teaches at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He went to Moody Bible Institute. He was an evangelical Christian, at least he says he was. Then he went to Princeton University, and he studied under the greatest manuscript expert of the last century. His name was Bruce Metzger. Bruce Metzger was a Christian. He believed that the Bible could be reconstructed accurately, and he believed that the scriptures were true. Metzger mentored Ehrman. In 2006, Ehrman wrote this book called Misquoting Jesus, in which he says he's lost his faith. He now calls himself a happy agnostic. Now, what does agnostic mean? It means not to know. I can understand being agnostic, but I can't understand being happy about it, especially if you're a professor. Aren't you supposed to want to know? How are you happy not knowing? I'm happy being ignorant. I don't think so. But he calls himself now a happy agnostic. And in this book, he tries to spin the data in such a way that when you walk away from the text, you doubt that we know the New Testament documents can be accurately reconstructed. That's why the book's called Misquoting Jesus. Maybe the scribes changed the text. How do we know what the text says? Now, what do we say to this? First of all, how could you know that the original had been altered unless you knew what the original said? Think about this for a second. If you say that you're misquoted, what does that imply you know? What the right quote was. Now, in fairness to Ehrman, I'm not sure he titled the book. But to say misquoting Jesus is to imply you know what Jesus actually said. So we ought to ask Dr. Ehrman, if you don't think this is what Jesus actually said, then what did he say? You must know, because you're saying he's been misquoted in here. Right? In fact, in an interview, a radio interview, Dr. Ehrman was asked, Dr. Ehrman, what do you think the New Testament documents really did say originally? And you know what he actually said on the interview? Oh, pretty much what we have now. What? Pretty much what you have now? Then why did you write the book? I mean, it just made no sense at all. It gets worse. Hang on. Secondly, about 80% of the variants are spelling. There's no change in meaning. Like sometimes it's Christ Jesus or Jesus Christ. They're inverted. Or sometimes you spell Peter differently in one particular manuscript than you do in another. Or in one he's called Cephas, and another he's called Peter. Or in one he's called Simon, another he's called Peter. So these are spelling differences or just name changes, but you know who the same person is. Only 1% of these variants affect any meaning, and none affect any significant Christian doctrine. And finally, and probably most forcefully, Ehrman doesn't even agree with himself. Now, why am I saying this? I could hardly believe this when I discovered this. In the same year Ehrman wrote, actually, I think it was 2005, Misquoting Jesus came out. When he wrote Misquoting Jesus in 2005, he wrote it to a popular audience, so people like you and me could understand it. But that same year, he wrote a book with Bruce Metzger, his mentor. He updated the classic work on this subject that Metzger had written earlier. So Ehrman and Metzger got together. They updated the work. And the conclusion that Metzger and Ehrman came together was that we do know what the New Testament documents originally said. That this is an accurate copy of the original. But in his Misquoting Jesus book to the general public, he said, we're not sure. I have a question. Why would you write a book, one book, in 2005 that says to the academic world, we can trust this, and yet another book in the same year to the general public that says, no, we don't know what this originally said? Why would you come to different conclusions in the same year with the same data? I'm speculating now. I don't know this, but I'm just speculating. When he writes to the academic world knows that if he spins something the wrong way, they're going to nail him on it. But when he writes to the general public, they don't know that. And if you write a book to the general public that says the Bible can be trusted, that the documents can be trusted, that we know what the original said, that does not get you on the Colbert Report. That does not get you on the Daily Show with Jon Stewart. That does not get you a favorable review in the New York Times. That does not get you on NPR. That does not get you all the accolades in the media. But if you come out and say, I don't know if we can trust this, that gets you all those things. And you sell a lot of books. And Misquoting Jesus has sold a lot of books. And every time Bart Ehrman comes out with a book now, goes right to the top of the charts. And you want to see how I know this? This is in the appendix of the paperback version of Misquoting Jesus. These are Bart Ehrman's own words. Check this out. Bruce Metzger is one of the great scholars of modern times, and I have dedicated the book to him because he was both my inspiration for going into textual criticism and the person who trained me in the field. I have nothing but respect and admiration for him, and even though we may disagree on important religious questions, he is a firmly committed Christian and I am not, we are in complete agreement on a number of very important historical and textual questions. If he and I were put in a room and asked to hammer out a consensus statement on what we think the original text of the New Testament probably looked like, there would be very few points of disagreement, maybe 1 or 2 dozen places out of many thousands. The position I argue for in Misquoting Jesus does not actually stand at odds with Professor Metzger's position that the essential Christian beliefs are not affected by textual variants in the manuscript tradition of the New Testament. Can you believe this? Why did he write the book then? The book should be called Misquoting Ehrman. Now, if you want to see Dr. Ehrman debate, you can watch several debates. He's debated Mike Licona, a friend of mine at Southern Evangelical Seminary. He's debated Dan Wallace, the top manuscript scholar in the world right now, and the guy I'll see next week. And you can see that on, I think it might be on YouTube now. I'm not sure if it's on YouTube, but if you go to CSNT, Center for the Study of New Testament Manuscripts, csntm.org, you can not only see articles that Wallace has written on this, but you can also see manuscripts themselves, because that organization is trying to take digital photos of every Greek manuscript of the New Testament in existence. Do you know how many photos that's going to take? 2.6 million. And they're only at about like 200,000 now. They've got to get everything digitally photographed, so even if the manuscript goes away, they'll still have it. We've got more than enough evidence to know that the New Testament documents are reliable. In fact, here's Dan Wallace about Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman is part of a very small minority of textual critics in what he's saying. Frankly, I don't think he has challenged his biases. I think he has fed them. And he has just debated Ehrman February 1st, 2012. So you can go online and see if you can find that. All right? Sir Frederick Kenyon many years ago said it cannot be too strongly asserted that in substance the text of the Bible is certain, especially is the case with the New Testament. So the answer to question number one unequivocally is yes. Even Bart Ehrman, when you press him, agrees. But the more interesting question is question number two: do the original New Testament documents tell the truth? And for that, we're going to have to go to Lesson 9 next time we get back. But we have time for questions right now. So if we can go to the Q&A phase, and since no one likes to ask the first question, we'll move right on to the second question.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Question, I guess you consider this evidence of miracles. Parting the Red Sea would definitely, I would consider a miracle.
Would the parting of the Red Sea be considered a miracle?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. God did use a strong east wind, it says right there in the Bible, but God directly caused that. And then he held it open, obviously, for all the Israelites to get through, and then he closed it back, of course.
So we're talking about a long duration.
Yes, sir.
Now, as far as evidence goes, I don't have references, but about 5 years ago it came out that they started noticing reefs under the waterbed of the Red Sea, and they looked peculiar because it was all like ground, and they went down and dug it up and brought it up, and it was wagon wheels and spears.
Oh, yeah, the chariot wheels. Yeah, I'm not, I don't know if that's been verified. My friend Bob Cornuke, as I mentioned, has been after some of that. In fact, he is the one that found, he and one other guy named Ron Wyatt, well, let me back up. Bob Cornuke and Larry Williams in 1988 and 1989 snuck into Saudi Arabia and discovered what appears to be the real Mount Sinai, called Jabal al-Lawz, which is Mountain of Almonds, right next to Jabal el-Musa, which means Mountain of Moses, in Midian, which is where the Bible seems to indicate Moses was from. And Paul indicates that Mount Sinai is in Arabia. Arabia was always on the east side of the Gulf of Aqaba. Okay, here's the Sinai Peninsula. I know what we're talking about here. I wish I had a map here, but I don't. Sinai Peninsula, right? From your perspective, Egypt's here, right? Saudi Arabia's here. This is the Sinai Peninsula. Everyone says, oh, they went across the Red Sea somewhere over here. Well, they did have to cross something here, but you know where they really went across the Red Sea? The Gulf of Aqaba, which is on this side. They either went down at the Straits of Tiran, which is at the bottom of the Sinai Peninsula, or at Nuweiba, which is right about in the middle. Either of those two appear to be the crossing points. And the real Mount Sinai is right about here. And there have been many things discovered around this mountain that I think beyond any reasonable doubt prove that it is truly Mount Sinai. So, but as far as chariot wheels and all that, I don't think any of that has been verified to this point.
It's funny how man's intellect keeps digging for, and they keep proving themselves wrong.
Yes, sir. The Bible, when it's put under a microscope, usually turns out to be correct. Yes, sir.
Just recently, my son, who attends a middle school, came home from, I believe it is a social studies class, and his instructor is promoting before the common era versus
Yes, sir.
BC. I would think that most of the world uses before Christ. I was unfamiliar with before the common era. Could you comment on
That
that?
is what secularists use to denote before Christ, BCE. You'll see that. And then you'll see CE for common era. They don't use AD or BC. They use BCE, before common era, and CE, common era. So they're just changing those out to avoid any reference to religion and Christ. Yeah, that's commonly used now.
So I like what you did with the New Testament. But what about all the books that we chose not to include?
Mm-hmm.
Where do we come up with what belongs and what doesn't belong?
Okay, excellent question. And
I might have a follow-up.
what is the canon? And if you're asking what other books are out there that the Bible doesn't contain that some say should be in the Bible, like the Gospel of Peter, the Gospel of Judas, the Gospel of Thomas, the reason they're not in the Bible is because they weren't written until at the earliest, the mid-150s. In other words, they were not written by Thomas, they were not written by Peter, they were not written by Judas. They were written by other people who took their names and put their names on there. Why? Because they knew that the people who considered themselves Christians would only believe in a document written by an apostle or somebody who knew an apostle. So they would borrow an apostle's name and put it on a document. We know these are late editions for a number of reasons. There's anachronisms in there. Some of them have to do with when they were discovered. We know they were not written in the first century. But we know Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were written in the first century by those individuals. We have good evidence that those individuals wrote them, despite what some people will say. We don't know who wrote them. We have pretty good evidence on who wrote those documents, and there's eyewitness testimony in there that come from the first century. So when you see these other Gospels, and if you read the Da Vinci Code or any of that kind of thing, what they say in there isn't the whole truth. And oh, by the way, let me point this out as well. I know this is shocking, but not everything you read on the internet is true either. Okay? So you got to watch out where your sources are coming from. But you know, that's a backhanded compliment to the early Christians. Why is it a backhanded compliment? Because it's admitting that those people wouldn't just believe anything. They would only believe something from someone who has already been authenticated as a prophet, either through miracles or an association with an apostle like Luke. They would know that that individual truly spoke the truth, but other individuals didn't. That's why they stole their names and put them on there. It would be like when they discovered the Gospel of Judas not long ago. They said, wow, this is giving new insights into what happened to Jesus and Judas. No, it doesn't. It would be like somebody today, 150 years later, writing a biography of John Wilkes Booth and putting Booth's name on it, even though he really didn't. They bury the thing, and 2,000 years from now, somebody discovers it and goes, oh, wow, we got new insights into the assassination of Lincoln. This comes from Booth himself. We would be duped 2,000 years from now if we said that really supersedes what we did know about Lincoln's assassination, because that is a forgery written 150 years later, not by Booth, but by somebody else who just put Booth's name on it.
Got no problem with that. Okay. So why do we add back books like Revelations and Job and 2 Peter's after we went through this very extensive effort to find the exact right books?
I don't know if I'm following the question. Why do
Council in Nicaea,
Uh-huh.
they very wise people got together,
Uh-huh.
probably guided by the Spirit,
Mm-hmm.
and determined which books should be included in the New Testament.
Okay, well, let me point out that, let's be proper with our terminology. They didn't determine, they discovered what was inspired, and they had some criteria in order to do that. in order to discover whether or not the document was written by an apostle. They had to discover that, or someone who knew an apostle. Was it accepted by the people of God? Did it tell the truth about God that they knew to that point? Was it something that that was consistent with previous revelation? It's not going off out on its own. Was it confirmed by miracle? So they had some criteria to try and discover that. Now, there was some haggling over certain books, like James. Does it contradict what Paul says in Romans 5 about works and all that, or Romans 4? There were some haggling over certain books, 2 Peter, who wrote 2 Peter, that whole thing. But the main books were accepted. In fact, just about all of the books, 25 of the 27, I believe, I have to look, we actually have it in our book, by like 110 AD, or 23 out of 27, had already been quoted by most of the early church fathers that were alive at that point. So it's not really a big mystery as to what should be in the Bible we have today. Now remember, of course, for the first 280 years of Christianity, Christianity was either illegal or frowned upon in the Roman Empire. It wasn't until Constantine came along in about 311 AD who made Christianity tolerable, and then it kind of took over the Roman Empire. That's when they could get together and do these conferences and do these councils. It wasn't that they could do it quite freely prior to that, so many of these councils came down much later because they were free to do them then. But you know what? Canonization is an interesting question, but canonization, by the way, does not affect whether or not Christianity is true. When you think about it, if God exists and Jesus rose from the dead, and we've got the basic truths in these documents about that, well, should Jude be in there? Is that going to change anything if Jude isn't in there, or if James isn't in there? Well, it may change a little bit about some of our theology, but is it going to change the central facts of Christianity? No. So it's an interesting question, important question, what should be in the canon, but even if we're unsure about what should be in the canon, that's not going to affect the truth of Christianity. Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Could you stand up if you don't mind? Thank you.
I returned back to school to take some religious classes, and I'm taking some world religions. And some of the things that you pointed out, with just mentioning the girl that had been a real strong Christian all of her life and had gotten to the higher educations and the higher education classes, and how shocked she was because of things that her professor had told her. And I have also found out that sometimes the way they bring about their doctrine is it questions. It makes you question, even though you know it can either make you stronger or it can pull you away. Mm-hmm. I'm really concerned with us sending our children and grandchildren to the higher educations when we are, we can't do anything about it. Do you know what I'm saying? You've got the doctors. You've got the doctors.
Well,
you understand what I'm saying?
I actually think you can do something about it, and that is prepare them before they go.
Okay, but when they get to that level, I've been a Christian all my life and never had I will say I haven't really had a doubt that there was a Christ, or that I was a Christian, or didn't trust the Bible. But sometimes how they say it or how they bring it about, it makes you question how you learn things. Mm-hmm. So besides, we can use your book and preaching to our children or teaching them. Mm-hmm. There is only so much God they let us have in our schools, our public schools.
True.
We need some concrete to put our kids' feet in before they do go off to the higher education. And I mean,
right.
It shocks me because I had never questioned anything before, but the way they bring it about, the way they present it, it's not exactly the most attractive way for a Christian.
No, it's not, and really, the responsibility for the education of our children lies with us, not with the school teacher, not with the Sunday school teacher, but with us. Now, we got busy lives, and we just can't do it. We have to do it. We have to make sure that they are trained properly, because you don't want your kid to go off unarmed into hostile territory, and that's what we do every day. We send them off unarmed, and we wonder why they get picked off. So we have to find a way to get this done. Whether it's through a private school, a home school, or equip them before they go to public school, we have to get it done. It's too important not to.
When we were driving here tonight,
Uh-huh.
we were listening to the radio, and it happens that Bart Ehrman was speaking about his latest book,
Mhm.
which is called Did Jesus Exist? And in the interview, he was saying that yes, he does exist, but it's quite different than the one we hear about today in church. And one of his arguments is that the Jesus that the Bible portrays is a Jesus of a more apocalyptic time where the world was about to end,
Yep.
which obviously didn't happen. And he also mentions an example that in the Palm Sunday description, where Jesus enters Jerusalem right before the crucifixion, that could not have happened the way it was described, because it would have been such a big event that he would have been arrested right there, right in front of the Romans. It was such a big, the narrative presents such a big thing that he said it would have been impossible. So my question to you is, how would you unpack this, and how would you respond to
My
it?
first question is, how did you come to that conclusion? The question we had up there before. How does he know that that would happen without having knowledge of that century and knowledge of that area? And where's he getting that knowledge from? In other words, he seems to be presupposing he has knowledge of that first century Palestine, yet he's trying to call into doubt what the New Testament says about it. So, in effect, he appears to be using the New Testament to say the New Testament can't be trusted. How does he know that? And if he's trying to say that the New Testament depicts Jesus in an apocalyptic way, and Jesus really wasn't an apocalyptic figure, a God figure, how does he know this? Does he have evidence outside the Bible that says that Jesus didn't do these things and his disciples didn't believe he rose from the dead? Because he knows as well as I do that even non-Christian writers say that the disciples believed Jesus rose from the dead. People like, in fact, if you line up Josephus and Suetonius and Tacitus and Thallus and Phlegon, as we'll do next time when you come back in May, we'll show you these New Testament or these non-Christian writers briefly mention Jesus and the apostles. They're not eyewitnesses, but they knew kind of what was going on at the time. And when you read what they say, you get a storyline congruent with the New Testament. I might also ask Bart Ehrman, if Jesus never himself claimed to be God, then why did they kill him? I mean, think about it. You don't get killed for skipping around saying love your neighbor. You get killed, and Bart Ehrman believes Jesus was crucified. You get killed for saying you're God, because in a Jewish context, that's blasphemy. In a Roman context, that's sedition. So if Jesus was just kind of a nice guy walking around preaching nice flowery sermons, none of this would have ever come up. He never would have been crucified. His disciples never would have thought he had risen from the dead. So you see, there's a difference between coming up with theories and possibilities and coming up with theories and evidence. You can come up with theories and possibilities all day, but to have evidence for your theory, that's a whole nother thing. We've got to ask people like Bart Ehrman, what's the evidence you have for that? If it's just speculation, then I'll just take it as speculative, fine. I think we've got good evidence that what actually happened, as we'll see next time, to Jesus, we can find in the pages of the documents we now call the New Testament, because there's very good evidence they told the truth, as you'll see when we come back. All right? I want to thank you for being here tonight. Why don't we have a quick word of prayer and we'll go. Father, we thank you for the fact that you've given us good evidence that indeed you do exist, that miracles are possible, and that the New Testament documents are reliable. I pray that as we take this out, we'll not only be edified by it, but we will have answers for people who might ask us why we have the hope that we have. I pray we'd be able to do it with gentleness and respect, but also do it in love and truth, because eternity matters, Father. There's nothing more important than either spending eternity with you or choosing to be separated from you. And I pray that you'd give us the courage and the wisdom to be able to bring as many people into your kingdom as possible. And thank you for all the team here at Transformation Church. I pray that you'd guide us all this week as we go. In Christ's name, amen.